I want to talk about the two most important things for a coach or a trainer to have when it comes to their practices, their workouts, any sort of interaction that they have with their players. I think there's two major things that you have to prioritize above everything else if you want to get the most out of the players that you work with. I thought about this last week when I got an email from a dad, and he was talking about his daughter was in one of my programs in Basketball IQ Academy, and they were going through it, and he was talking about some of the struggles that they were having with their team, and he was trying to just get some clarity on what they should do, what they should focus on. And so pretty much when I read what he wrote to me, there was a lot that kind of jumped out to me. One of the first things that jumped out to me was that he said that, yeah, my daughter plays really well and I see a lot of improvement when it comes to pickup games or, when it comes to workouts. And then as soon as she gets with her team and now all of a sudden she's wearing the jersey, it's like all of that's out the window. And that improvement that I'm watching in the pickup games and all that, it's gone. It's not there. It's like she's a completely different player. And that right there jumped out to me because in my response to him was, well, can you tell me what it looks like in terms of how her coach interacts with her with the rest of her team? And it made me think a lot about the topic of this video. By the way, if you're watching this for the first time, my name is Ethan Koza. I have a YouTube channel called Vision Driven Basketball, with about 90,000 subscribers. And I created the second channel as a way for me to be able to go more in depth into different topics. Part of me is thinking about making this more of like a coach trainer education type channel because on my main channel it doesn't really fit in terms of the type of content that I make over there. So we'll see if you're into that. Drop a comment. Let me know if there's anything else that you want to see. If you're a player and you want to see something, drop that down below as well. So anyway, I posted on Instagram. I was like, hey, is there anything more important as a coach than these two things? And that was creating an optimal learning environment and creating psychological safety for your players. And I heard back from a few other coaches and trainers who, I chopped it up with for a little bit there. But that email really got me thinking about these two things and how it's really, really hard to, first of all, be good if you're a coach, but it's also pretty much impossible if you're a trainer to help your players get better if you don't do these two things. You can know all the drills in the world. You can have all the understanding of skill acquisition and motor learning and all the scientific theory that you want to have, which all that's important. But then when it comes to the actual, like, in the moment interactions you have, the environment you create is massive. So the first part of that, creating an optimal learning environment, is huge. And I like this is probably where I see the biggest difference between the coaches who understand and who don't is the way that they conduct their practices, the way that they conduct their workouts. A lot of times I look at it and I see, okay, there's not a lot of struggle happening. And then fast forward 3 days later and you get to a game and it's the opposite where everything is difficult and it's a war. It's chaotic, it's crazy, and you know, you have to ask yourself, I think the quote that I've heard used when it comes to stuff like this is you can't train in a peaceful world and then expect to be successful in a chaotic world. So a lot of times practices, workouts are peaceful, meaning the entire time for a 2 hour practice is, on air. So 1 on 0, 3 on 0, 5 on 0. I think it's probably most prevalent when it comes to like trainers is because you want things to be done perfectly. Okay, execute this move perfectly, do this forward perfectly. Let's do the mic and drill. Let's make 10 in a row. Let's shoot, 5 shots, 5 spots, and that's our workout right there. And there's a time and place for all that. I'm not demonizing any of those things specifically, but when that becomes the bulk of what we're doing, you look at it and you say, well, okay, now you got to go perform when there's 5 people on the other side of the floor who are trying to actively stop you from doing those things. And there's a referee who's going to call fouls, who's going to, officiate the game, and they may be good and they may be terrible. You don't know. There's fans who are screaming. There's another coach who's screaming too. And, there's just a million things going on. And by the way, now there's pressure on you to win the game, obviously, especially if it's, for like a school team and all of a sudden wins actually matter. Like AAU, it's tough to know if the wins actually matter sometimes because a lot of these tournaments, like you don't know what you're getting. But that initial winning part's massive. But then also, if you're a player and you have 10 players on your team, you're all of a sudden thinking about, well, how do I make sure that I play well enough that I stay on the floor? I don't want to get benched. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to look bad. I don't want coach to get angry at me, which we'll talk about in a second here. But that's the other piece of it. So if your learning environment isn't optimized to prepare your players for that, you're going to struggle to see that transfer happen from practice into games. You're going to spend a lot of time doing stuff and you're going to be like, why is it not showing up? Well, it's because the environment you've created in your practices isn't conducive to that actually becoming something that translates. And so I think when it comes to developing an optimal learning environment, I think that it requires a couple of different mindset shifts. I think that the number one thing is that you have to get away from thinking that the goal is perfection or the goal is for things to look a certain way. And you should instead flip that and be like, my goal is to make this practice messy, to make it chaotic, to make them make mistakes, to make them struggle, to make them sometimes feel like, man, I think I might have got worse today. I was terrible today. I had a bad, because that's what happens with games too. Sometimes you leave a game and you're like, I was terrible. How do you handle that if you've never had to handle a practice where you felt like that? And so when you go from thinking, okay, the judge or the meter for based on how I grade my practices goes from how little did we mess up, how good did we look. If you were a parent who walked in and watched that workout, do they think, wow, this coach really knows what he's doing? Or can you flip that and say, my measurement for success in a workout or a practice is how much did I make them struggle? How many decisions did I make them make? How many times did I make them step up and take ownership or make an adjustment or struggle through something? And how often did I find something that they're succeeding at and throw another challenge at them? So that now when they get into games and it's messy and it's chaotic and there's a lot of stuff that gets thrown at them that requires an adjustment, they're able to do those things. And I think that is really the most important mindset shift to make if you want to create that optimal learning environment. There's a principle called the Goldilocks principle, which I talk about a lot on my main channel, which essentially just means the story Goldilocks walks into the house and she, wants to drink some porridge and the first bowl is too hot, the second bowl is too cold, and the third bowl is right in the middle. She wants to sit in the chair. First one's too high, second one's too low, third one's just right. And then she wants to lay in the bed. The first one's too firm, the second one's too soft, and the third one is just right. When we talk about creating that optimal learning environment and creating drills and workouts that actually promote our players getting better in a way that translates to games, we want to make sure that we're abiding by the Goldilocks principle. So generally, it could mean between 30 to 70% of the reps are going to be mistakes, failures. There's going to be a lot of failure reps. So you have to find a way to put your team, put your players in that mode as much as possible where they're going to walk into a practice and maybe half of it is not perfect. Maybe certain players are making mistakes every other rep, every other drill, every other whatever possession that you might be running. And when that happens, the overall learning process where their brain has to say, okay, do I need to improve at this or do I not? The problem with the first type of learning environment when everything's perfect and there's no mistakes is that there's no reason for your brain to say, okay, we're going to put the mental energy towards getting better at this skill when there's no reason to. We're succeeding every single time. So just in the way that if you're in the weight room and you're trying to get stronger, if you're lifting the same weight for a long amount of time, eventually you're going to stop getting stronger because there's no more challenge. Your body's not going to use the unnecessary calories and the unnecessary energy on building new muscle if there's no reason for it. It's going to conserve it. Brain is the same way. If we want to improve a skill, it's all cognitive. So are we putting our brain in a position where it has to say to itself, man, I'm not doing very well at this. How do I adjust? I keep missing this. How do I adjust? How do I get better? How do I grow? That's uncomfortable to do. And it's a really hard process. And your players are going to struggle through that. But that's how actual improvement happens. So as consistently as you can put your players into those positions, that's how they get better. And that's how they develop skills that actually translate. So simple ways to do this would be, if you're doing shooting drills, find a way to add defense to it, especially if you're with a team. One thing that I love doing throughout the season is we do like a 3-on-2 or a 4-on-3 shooting drill where, so let's say it's 4-on-3, we have offense in the slot, corner, and then we've got one defender who's on the ball and then two can be in help. So the defender on the ball has got to start back to the ball and the offensive player is just going to put the ball right on their back and they can take the ball off and drive and get a paint touch whenever. At that point, they're kicking it out and the offense is going until they get an open three. So we're working on game threes, but it's way more difficult than it would be if we were just shooting on air because now you have to make a decision to shoot, which makes it harder because there's also a decision to not shoot. So that can lead to indecisive. And any coach will tell you when you shoot a shot and you're indecisive about it, the likelihood of it going in is way lower than if you're confident and decisive about what you're doing. So you have to overcome that, which applies directly into games. But also, now you have defense closing out at you. Now, all of a sudden, you had to drive, kick, and relocate back onto the perimeter. Ball gets swung, drove again, kicked out to you. Now you got to make that shot. And that shot's different than probably any other shot that you shot in that practice. And then the next rep, you might be shooting a completely different shot. And so it makes the drill a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more misses involved, but those misses actually are valuable now. And the makes are even more valuable too, because you've probably had to make some adjustments in order to actually get to that make now. And again, that drill is going to translate into games because we're increasing difficulty. We are making it so they're not going to make as many shots. They're not going to make as many good decisions. They have to be there. They have to be present. And that matters right there. That's a simple way to do it. And really, any way that we can find to make a drill a little bit more difficult and find a way to challenge them and make them solve problems, that is going to be how we get them better. If you can change your mindset to say, how can I make these guys solve as many problems as possible today? You're going to build players who can solve problems in games, and that's how you create the optimal learning environment. So that was the number one thing that I was like, man, this is what coaches have to have. You have to understand that you have to apply this to what you do. And then the second part, going back to the email, where I asked the dad, I was like, so what is your daughter's interaction like with the coach, and what is it like for the rest of the team? And his response was, yeah, it's tough because their coach is always yelling. He's always saying, you better show me something, you're getting pulled. And there's constant pressure, negative pressure from that coach to perform. And the problem with that is that sometimes that works. When you have a really talented player or a player who just naturally responds to that, they're going to excel in that. The problem is that a lot of players aren't going to excel in that. And in some cases, players are going to crumble because of that. Players who probably have some ability or potential to be an asset to your team, whether it be currently or down the line, or, a player who maybe has the potential to get a lot better in your workouts or whatever, they're not going to if they don't feel psychologically safe. That just means that you essentially provide the space for that player to say, hey, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to try things and take risks. It's okay to mess up and fail sometimes. And giving them the understanding that, it's not going to be the end of the world. You're not going to, rip into them every time that they try and do something. The reason that this matters a ton is because if you want your players to get better, there has to be a willingness from them to take risk. If they won't do that, if they're not willing to risk potentially failing, they're never going to apply anything that they work on, because there's a chance that they're going to mess that up and not succeed. And then they think, oh, if I do that, my coach is going to rip me apart. He's going to bench me. He's going to freak out. And I don't want that. I'm going to avoid that. So I'd rather just not take the risk. And now what that means for you as a coach is that your team's not going to be as good, because even your best players are probably going to hold themselves back a little bit. And your players who could be contributing way more aren't going to, because of the psychological fear that has been created because of the lack of psychological safety that you create as a coach. This is another big shift that I think matters a ton. And I think when it comes to applying this, it's really about communicating with your players that your goal is not perfection. Much like we just talked about with creating the optimal learning environment, the goal shouldn't be to be perfect. The goal shouldn't be that everything looks good. The goal should be, how do we actually get better? And we get better through struggle, through failure, through making adjustments. You have to tell your players, hey, my only requirement from you is that you're willing to try, is that you're willing to fail, that you're willing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations over and over and over again. And when you fail, that you try it again, that you make an adjustment, you try it again. And if that's the way that they know that you think, they're going to be much more willing to actually put themselves out there and try those things. And you're going to get players who become problem solvers. A lot of coaches are frustrated because their players feel like robots, and they go out and they can't figure anything out, and they're always looking at the coach for what to do, and the coach feels like they don't have any sort of control over what goes on the court. And a lot of times it becomes a byproduct of a lack of psychological safety, because they don't feel empowered to take risk. They don't feel empowered to take chances. They don't feel empowered to try and solve problems because you've never empowered them to do that. And that's such a crucial aspect of becoming or building players who actually can succeed in games. And so that's massive. I think another way to apply this is, instead of making your feedback always, I know it and you don't know it, or I'm the expert and you are the beginner, or I'm the boss and you are the person who's supposed to follow me. Because a lot of times with coaches, I watch it in games all the time. It's like, honestly, it's like horrible what I watch in these AAU games. Because, side note, I see all these other countries that have requirements for coaches to actually be coaches, and other sports even in America that do. And I'm like, basketball desperately needs something like that, because the amount of coaches who I watch who act not only aren't helping their players, but are actively like tearing them down. It's like, it's mind blowing to me. Like, anybody can just pick up a clipboard and they're a coach, and it's every year gets worse. Like, this is my probably fifth or sixth year coaching AAU, and every single year I see it more and more and more. And like every tournament, it feels like it's worse and worse. So a big part of that is because coaches come at their players as if they are dumb, they don't know anything, and they go at their players as if they aren't making decisions based on the information available to them. Right? I saw a coach this past weekend in an AAU tournament who we start off the game and his player goes down. They're on offense. He catches the ball in the wing, attacks a closeout, gets into the paint, and we had like three defenders rotate over, wall up, did a really good job in help. And he goes up, shot fakes it, no one bites on it. Shot fakes again, no one bites on it, and he's got nothing. Like, it was exceptional defense, and yeah, had he put that shot up, it would have been heavily contested. It would have either gotten blocked or would have missed, because it was a very difficult shot. And so his coach starts screaming at him, "Shoot the ball, go up with it. What are you waiting for?" And the first player kind of let it go, and I was like, okay. And the coach just kept going on about it. The whole, like, as they're rotating back on defense, he's just going on and on and on and on about it. And then at one point, the player eventually looks over at him. He says, like, "Coach, there's three guys there, and then no one jumped on the shot fake. I couldn't shoot the ball." And the coach just freaked out, pulled him out of the game, screams at him on the sideline. And I just think to myself, like, your player is 100% right. Like, 100% right. And the problem again is that coaches approach things like this, where they say, "I know it and you don't know it. I am the expert. I know everything. You know nothing. Listen to me." And there's no empowerment there, right? Like, that player is not more empowered to try and drive to the basket and make a play. We ended up beating that team by 30, right? And not a bad team, but again, when you have a coach who approaches things like that, it's hard to consistently overcome adversity and failure, because you're afraid of what the repercussions of that might be. And that was what I watched in that exact situation right there. Instead of approaching things like that, being willing to ask questions, I think, is such an important skill to have. Where instead of your player, you might even know that they made a wrong decision or whatever, bring them over and ask them what they saw. "Hey, what did you see there? Hey, what would you change there? Hey, why did you do that?" And let them use their own words, because then a lot of times, if it's a player who it understands the game, they're going to tell you exactly what you're thinking. But now you can use their words as a way to give them a roadmap going forward. Let's say your point guard turns the ball over against the press, and a lot of coaches are going to freak out, start screaming at him, whatever. But you bring them over, you say, "Hey, what happened there? What did you see? What would you change right there? What was the decision you should have made right there?" They're going to say, "Well, the trap came. I should have, picked the ball up and maybe pass faked it first to get the guy to jump, because they're being aggressive, and that would open up the pass. Or, I had an advanced pass early and I didn't throw it early enough, and so I gave time for the trap to get to me and I'll turn the ball over." Now you're not only getting an answer that you probably are thinking about too, but also they are taking ownership over that. They had to think to themselves, "Okay, what did I see? What could I have done better? What did I miss right there?" Now it's their answer, and they're better for it, and they're more equipped to go into that situation again and make the right decision, because they've had to actually mentally process it. So instead of you thinking, "I've got all the answers, you shut up and I tell you," ask them questions, because the goal, I try to make this very clear to my players, like, the goal is to win. And I'm on your side, because the better you are, the more that we're going to win, the more likely we are to win. And so when you empower your players by asking questions, it's such a empowering feeling for them, and it also helps them to perform a lot better, because now they're actually the ones who are solving problems. You want to create problem solvers, ask them to solve problems, and they're going to be able to. Now, what this requires is that a little bit of patience from you. You might have a little bit less control, but you're going to have better players. And at the end of the day, you're a coach. You don't play. You're on the sideline. You can't really impact the game. Your players are the ones who you can draw up all the great plays you want. If they don't make the right decisions, then it doesn't matter. and you have no impact on them. So we have to equip them, prepare them to solve problems, to handle adversity on the court, and that's super important. Another thing that I do to create that psychological safety is I'll tell my players, like, guys, my goal is to make you mess up. My goal, maybe we'll do a shooting drill that has some sort of weird constraint on it. And like maybe it comes off of a bad pass, or I make them purposely shoot with weird feet, or whatever. And I will tell them, I say, hey, my goal here is to make you miss more shots. I used to tell my players all the time, like the last few years I've worked with some really, really good shooters, really, really good high school players. Uh, and so for some of these shooters, like these are players who are like the best shooters in their conference, on their teams, like just incredible shooters. And I used to tell them, I'd be like, they'd walk in the gym and be like, hey, my goal is to make you miss shots today. That's what I want to do, because I want you to have to solve problems and adjust and be challenged. And that's how you're going to get better. So now when they understand that, they're willing to buy into that. And they're saying, okay, you know what? It's okay that I'm struggling, because that's the goal. That's what he just told me. And they're not afraid to make mistakes now because of that. It also helps them to enjoy the process a lot more. They understand that difficulty and struggle is a part of it. And instead of running from that, they're much more willing to go through it. And when they're willing to go through it, now you have players who are going to progress way faster and build confidence faster and become better performers on the court because of it, right? Everybody knows a player who plays to not mess up and to not look bad. Everybody knows, can think of a player when I say that. And that's you want to, you can't create players like that if you want to be good. You want players who are not afraid of making a mistake here, who aren't afraid of taking a risk, who are willing to go out and do their best consistently. And you build that by creating psychological safety so that they know it's okay, that they're not going to be perfect every single time. So just to kind of reiterate that, if you want to get the most out of your players, build an environment where learning is prioritized and where they know that it's okay to fail, it's okay to struggle, and that you're on their side. I think a lot of players forget that sometimes, so it's important to reiterate those things. Now, you don't have to be perfect, and the other thing too is that every coach is different in terms of their personality. So you have to be who you are, and your players will respect you more for that. But when your players trust you, and when you create an environment that is optimal for them, they're going to get better way faster. They're going to enjoy playing for you, and you're going to enjoy coaching them way more. So hopefully this gave you some insights when it came to this. It's a really important topic. Like I said, drop some topics you might want to hear me talk about down below, and make sure you subscribe for more. Appreciate you for watching. Talk soon. Peace.